let me ask you this. Did I mention the fact that I figured out that there's a bear in the neighborhood, like on the last episode when I talked about the skinwalker?
We did not talk about it last episode, but you showed me a picture after the fact, and I mean, it's pretty massive.
Yeah. Do you think maybe the skinwalker shed its deer persona and became this bear?
I did not even think about that, but that's 100% what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you agree.
Yeah, 100%.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad. We're a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. We're your hosts, Woody Brown.
And Tyler Benz.
Took a little pause there.
I did have a little pause there, yeah. Sorry about that.
Do I say nostalgia? Weird? Nostalgia?
It kind of sounds like you're saying like nostalgia.
Nostalgia?
Like there's like an SIA in there.
I don't know, man. That's the one thing that people don't like. Having a podcast, you become hyper aware of, every little intricate detail of your voice,
nuance,
and how you pronounce stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the good news for us is either of us are immediately going to make fun of the other one when we hear it. So,
yeah, just in case the other one missed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, boy.
Well, this podcast is being recorded. This pod, if you will, is being recorded.
Don't do it, dude.
It's the worst. It is the worst when people do that. I'm not going to bring it up again, though.
You're right. Because you already talked about it in our Patreon.
That is true. If you're listening to this was recorded before Thanksgiving, but we'd like to take this moment to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving for all of our
we
domestic.
hope that you had a happy Thanksgiving, because by the time folks listen to this, it will have already been.
All right, let me take that again. Roll it back. If you're listening to this, we've already recorded this pre-Thanksgiving, so we hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving for all of our domestic listeners. And is there like another, like an international?
Yeah. I don't think there's an official international Thanksgiving Day, but I think other countries have something similar.
Boxing Day.
I think maybe we should have done some research on that before we start asking questions while we're rolling tape here, pal. But yes, we do hope everyone here in the States, if you celebrated it, but if you're around the world and you celebrate something similar this past week or whatever, we hope you had a good time as well. I mean, we're kind of approaching the Christmas holidays, and everything in life kind of starts to slow down a little bit. You got a little extra time to watch, movies. Do you have like a movie tradition for Thanksgiving break?
Not really. I mean, I feel like I've tried through the years to kind of get some stuff going, but I mean, Christmas is like a big one, but
sure,
not really for Thanksgiving. I mean, I will say usually like around the Thanksgiving season. So this year is a little bit different because for you listeners, we've already done it, but during the Thanksgiving break, we are going to Universal Studios in Florida. The kids are super psyched because we've done it before, but like we were with the in-laws and we kind of just like blasted through any of the Hogwarts stuff, but like we're big Harry Potter fans, and
and now they have the How to Train Your Dragon stuff over there too, right?
Yeah, but I don't think it's open yet. I think it's still a couple of months.
And then next year, dude, you should have. I hope you go again next year because Mario.
I know. That's in that like new section. So it's like How to Train Your Dragon, Mario, something like Villains or something.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. But yeah, we're really excited. We're going to do the whole like, you can like it's kind of like Star Wars where it's like you can like make the wand and like I think they do like the sorting hat like to tell your house.
Yeah, dude. It's amazing.
The whole thing. It's going to be awesome.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So the reason I asked that is because like in my family growing up, we would always watch like, me and my brother would watch like all the Indiana Jones movies. And then as I got older, dude, The Godfather Have to. And then I think typically they play like on AMC.
I mean, here's
like a 24-hour cycle or whatever.
I know that I've told you this before, but
Hold on now, man. Don't say this out loud because I'm like terrified of what you're about to say because I don't think you've told me something. If it has to do with The Godfather and it's going to be bad news to me, you have held this in for all these years and you're about to drop it. This is exclusive information on our show here.
I'm
so scared.
Only seen pieces. I've never completely seen any of the Godfather movies.
You son of a gun, man. Well, I don't like there isn't an excuse, but yeah, there's just no excuse.
Yeah, there's not an excuse for sure.
I mean, it's just the best, dude.
Yeah, I know. And isn't the sequel like revered as like better than the original one?
Well, it depends on who you ask.
Mm-hmm.
There's reasons why I like part 2 more, and there's reasons why I like part 1 more. What's really cool, and here's the thing about part 2, it actually starts when Don Corleone was a kid in Italy, and it shows him immigrating into America through Ellis Island and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so you see, and then he's like a young man, so you see his rise, and it kind of cuts back and forth between that and, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's been out since the 70s, so shame on you.
Yeah.
And Michael's rise. What's interesting about The Godfather, you know what? I don't want to get into it here, man. It's, we did not plan on talking about The Godfather, but bottom line is you got to see it. And the cool thing is, I think it's AMC every year. Somebody does it where they actually play it in perfect chronological order, so they re-edited it. And so that's kind of cool. It's all chronological. So, it's a good way to kind of like get, I guess, the foundation of the story before you watch it 100 times like I have. So,
I mean, it sounds kind of like the, I think it's called like the chainsaw cut. I think we've talked about this before. It's like the Star Wars, like some fans like put together like, oh, you need to watch it in this. And it's kind of a weird order. Yeah.
I've got one of those on VHS. It's like a Phantom Menace recut without Jar Jar Binks.
Are you serious? Mm-hmm. That's hilarious.
But yeah, and then we would also watch Star Wars, so I'm glad you brought that up. So Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and The Godfather during Thanksgiving break was always like the family tradition.
All right, well, that's my mission. I am going to try to watch The Godfather this year.
You got to, man.
Yeah.
You got to tell me a little bit more about what you brought up in our D&D session. And I was like, nope, save it for the show. Because at first, let me put it this way. Tyler says, man, have you heard of this conspiracy theory? And this is with our D&D group. And I was like, dude, there's just so many conspiracy theories.
Oh, yeah. And if you're anything like me.
And then he started to describe it. And I was like, oof, this is kind of a pretty interesting one.
Uh-huh. Okay, so, and I mean, I don't want to get like super like in the weeds on it, but it is something really interesting. It's one of these topics, and I've said this before in past episodes for our longtime listeners, but it's the topic that kind of sort of brushes up against the idea of like some of the Tartaria stuff, some of the old world stuff. It's such a topic that I'm so fascinated with, and so it's kind of like at the top of my list, which is ironic.
Give the listeners like a very, very surface level brief on the Tartaria, old world, that kind of thing.
I mean, I hate to.
Just super, super surface though.
Okay, well, you and I both know that's impossible. No. Okay, here's the surface level. It's this idea that, so Tartaria was this area that many people believe is in present day Russia or in that area, right?
I'm already pissed. The surface level theory is that there is, or was, I should say, a society that existed before, that predates ours.
Yes.
And predates like as far back as we think civilized technologies and societies existed. Okay, so listener, think back, you're thinking, I don't know where you're thinking, maybe like ancient China or, where Egypt maybe even. So this theory is that there's societies that were on this planet.
Yeah.
Way before that, right?
Yes. But the significance of it being, where I'm saying is like in sort of present day Russia is there's just like tons and tons of like old maps that are that predate like the 1800s, where you see Tartaria, but then it's nowhere to be found. Like once like, America was like really established, and like especially like post the 1800s, the Rockefeller Education Initiative, we are never taught that this place existed. And so a lot of people, which I'm not completely married to it being like a Tartaria thing. However, I am married to there being this sort of old world, or this old, maybe it's a mass civilization, maybe it branched into like all parts of the world that existed that is being hidden from us. However, the Tartaria thing that is interesting is there have been, I don't necessarily know if it's like a FOIA request, but there have been CIA documents that have come out from the 50s on that have mentioned this hiding of Tartaria. And it literally says in the documents that, I mean, you can look into like Library of Congress and like find this stuff. So it is really interesting.
One thing that has kind of kept me it kept me from diving straight into it is like, I don't understand and you don't have to answer this. So this is simply rhetorical and just explaining why I haven't dove in. I don't understand what the
like the why
motivation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a theory behind that. So it is something that I want to dig into because like with a lot of these topics and conspiracy theories, I get annoyed by many of them, but I want to cover them because it's a lot of them are fascinating. Once you start like digging in, it's like, whoa, man, that is really weird,
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why I like them and like even more to tease Tyler about them. But this one, dude, whenever you started talking about this one, again, surface level wise, I was like, wait, what? And then you started talking about different things. And then, it's really fascinating, especially coming from our background of musicianship.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me start off by saying that in the ancient days, church bells were very important, right? They were looked at, and I didn't realize that there was an entire sort of like a consecration element to these things. There was like a whole like blessing thing. So back in the ancient days, and again, like, bells associated with like church bells that would ring, in a church, it goes back to like the 6th century. So they've been around for a long time. And right. I didn't realize this until I realized that I had to, kind of give a little bit of a background on these bells. But it's interesting because the bells, they're not just like, okay, we put some bells up and then we ring them and then that's it. The bells back in the day especially were looked at as like they would ward off devils, or they would keep demons or like evil at bay because they couldn't handle like the sound of the bells. And I've always
think of real quick, because you mentioned this the other night. You're leaving out a huge part of it when you set it up for me, which is think about ancient China or even just like Chinese culture now or Southeast Asia even. Bells still play a large part of it. Like you have like these little bells that you ring, ding, 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 like handbells in Chinese culture still to this day. So anyway, go ahead.
Yes, but for now, I want to talk about like in like a sort of more Christian traditions.
Okay, gotcha.
The bells are looked at as like pretty much to like ward off evil, right? And I always assumed, okay, well maybe there's like an element of this where if you look at like Lucifer or Satan or whatever in the Christian tradition, he was kind of looked at as like almost like a worship leader. Like he was like a worshiper, he would like sing and praise God with like music. And it says that like even when he would walk, it was like his body was like made of instruments, like the tinkling of like cymbals. It says that like when he spoke, it was like a horn was blowing, which is pretty interesting because it's that like sort of physical manifestation of like a walking instrument, which is kind of.
It also sounds like he's a robot.
It kind of does, right? Yeah, yeah. I've thought the same thing. But anyway, I've always just sort of associated it. Well, maybe there's something there with it being like he used to be this sort of worshiper or this musical instrument to like praise God. But then like after the fall, maybe he sort of rejects these bells. But
Yeah.
once I looked into like church bells, it's like a really like sacred thing. Like there's this whole blessing that was put on these bells that was reserved, to a bishop. It was like,
When you say bells, the one specifically that you're talking about, are you talking about like, because you say church bells, that's a pretty broad
well,
term.
no,
Are you talking about the ones that they're like Catholic,
yeah,
walking down the aisle ringing, or are you talking about the big
no,
ones
no, no,
at the top of the?
yeah, like up in like a church bell that you would hear across like a whole town.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, 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 like the big bells. There was a whole like rite that surrounded this apparently with a series of like 7 psalms. It was then also like blessed with holy water. It's like they're like speaking like prayers into it, while Psalms 145 to 150, which speaks of the praise of God, are chanted while it's being sort of consecrated. Then the bishop would pray that the bell is blessed, recalling that the Lord decreed through blessed Moses, your servant and lawgiver, that silver trumpets should be made and be sounded at the time of sacrifice in order to remind the people by their clear tones to prepare for your worship and to assemble for its celebration. Then it was that each bell is given like a name, which is another thing that I found interesting because we've spoken about, on the show, like we get into paranormal and we talk about like demonic stuff and I mean, even into like fae and like fairies and stuff, things like Rumpelstiltskin. It's like if you had the name of these entities, it's like you had power over them, So I find
Happens in Hellboy, dude.
exactly, yeah. And so you have like, I don't know. I found that interesting that each of the bells were like given like a name, and so it says, "At its sound, let all evil spirits be driven afar. Let thunder and lightning hail, storm be banished. Let the power of your hand put down the evil powers of the air, causing them to tremble at the sound of the bell and to flee at the sight of the holy cross engraved thereon." It says, "He then anoints the bell with 7 crosses on the outside with the oil of the sick, and 4 crosses on the inside with sacred chrism, as Psalm 29 is chanted." So there's just like this whole kind of thing to these bells that make them like very, very powerful, especially in like the ancient world, right? And so for us in like modernity, it's especially like, if you go to like France or even like Britain, anywhere in the UK, for us it's like and I mean there's still some here in the US too, but it's like you hear these church bells kind of ringing out, and it's really cool, it's like this, you suddenly have this feeling of like, oh, this is what the people, 1,000 years ago, they would have heard the same bell, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really, really cool. And I do like that there's like this whole kind of thing. So if you're looking at it from like a supernatural perspective, just the idea that like these bells are like kind of, it's not just like, oh, just the sound of the bell wards off evil spirits. It's like, no. These things are like sort of given ammunition to like fight against, spiritual wickedness in the area.
Man.
The other thing, and this is where it kind of gets into some of the Tartaria stuff and some of the old world sort of technology stuff, is these bells were known for like healing. So even just being in the presence of these bells, there's numerous accounts, like, you'll read all these accounts where they'll, sort of anecdotal little pieces where the people would say, and then I heard church bells and I was suddenly calm. Or then I heard, I was in the presence, I was in this church, and as soon as I heard these bells or even heard the organs, I was suddenly calmed. And it's like this idea that, there's this like sort of healing power, this like peace that comes from like just the sound of the bells. And I'm going to get into some of the whys of that here in a little bit, but the interesting thing, and the thing that does tie it into some of the old world stuff, and the idea that we've been kept from this knowledge, that came before us, is that all of these things which were kind of commonplace to the people of the old world have kind of been co-opted or completely destroyed or hidden. And I mean, even down to like, it's said that like Nikola Tesla spent a lot of his earlier days in Budapest. And if you look into Budapest, it's like there's a ton of stuff that kind of would lead someone to believe that like, wow, this is like, there's some like legit, kind of old world stuff. And when I say that, what I mean is like, we look at this architecture as, I think it's called like the Greco-Roman or the Romanesque revival architecture. And, when I say that, or if you see a picture of like an old chapel or something like that, you immediately think like, oh, it's something that's like in France or maybe even Italy. But once you start looking into it, this architecture is all across the globe. I'm talking, you would see a church or, whatever, some kind of building right in the middle of Egypt, in like, into the Far East, in the Philippines, in Italy, France, in America. Like it's kind of the same thing as our like the like Capitol buildings and stuff. And it really is kind of interesting because once you really dive in, there's this YouTube channel, this guy who has like a pretty heavy background in like architecture. And it's just called My Lunch Break. And the videos are pretty short. They're only like 10 minutes a piece. But he starts to break down the idea that like, okay, well, let's take a single city and let's take like a building. And he's like, he's kind of boots on the ground. He's like reaching out. He's speaking to like the historic societies. Number one, you see that every single major town in the U.S. has had a quote unquote Great Fire at some point within its history. And it's weird because all of these like quote unquote like old world buildings, like your Capitol buildings, all this stuff, we're like the history, if you really take time to like look into these things, because obviously they never expected to have like the internet and to be able to communicate with each other and like kind of break things down. And, they never expected that. And so once you look into this, you see that like, number one, there's a Great Fire that typically burns down these old world buildings. A lot of them did not survive. A lot of them are said that like, oh, well, there was a Great Fire. And then it was rebuilt in 1 year by this random guy that was the contractor. And weirdly enough, this random guy in the same year built 150 other giant, elaborate, stunning pieces of architecture all across America. And it's just like, once you really start looking, he does like a fantastic job. So I highly recommend looking into My Lunch Break. It's really cool. Anyway, all that to say, there's this idea that a ton of these old world pieces of architecture, obviously they have bells. And, now we know that there's a lot went into these things dating back to the 8th century. And so the thing that I was talking to Woody about that I realized that like we had never spoken about was, again, this falls in the late 1800s to early-ish 1900s. And it's this idea that the powers that be all around the globe, including members of the U.S. government, your robber barons, including like the Nazis and Hitler's Third Reich, they went all around and confiscated all of these bells, like all across the globe, which is kind of wild. And also something that we were never taught in our history books. We're told now that, of course, the Nazi occupation of Europe, saw that during the Second World War, 150,000 European church bells were melted by the National Socialist regime. 90,000 were from Germany itself. The rest were from regions of Eastern and Western Europe that were occupied by Nazi Germany or annexed to the Third Reich. Alsace-Lorraine, Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, Bohemia, Moravia, Austria, and Sudetenland. we're told now that if you look this up, like, oh, well, they confiscated all these bells specifically just so that they could like melt them down for the war effort. However, once you start digging, you see that there's many that are still around, these things called bell graveyards. And it's just huge fields of, like, as far as you can see, just these old bells. And what's weird is most of these bells that you see in these photos, they would break them, much like our Liberty Bell, which
I was going to say,
is kind of interesting. And so it's like, were they really just getting, like, confiscating these bells so that they could, like, melt them down? And also, you know, even in just Poland alone, 22,500 were confiscated from Poland, you know, all throughout Germany, all throughout, like, Europe. And then we even get into, because once I told Woody, I was like, well, I wonder, I've heard that it's also a like a east, like in the Far East and stuff, that it was happening there too. But it made me think, after doing the research into, like, you know, like the power behind these bells when associated to, like, Christian, like, specifically like Catholic churches and stuff, like, well, does that add up as far as, like, with, like, the, you know, Buddhist temples and stuff like that? And it's kind of funny because, I mean, it's not funny at all, but around the exact same times, 45,000 of these bells from these temples, including, like, prayer wheels, they would completely disappear from the late 30s to the mid 40s. And again, we're given this story that, like, oh, they were just, they were taking these bells to, just to melt them down or smelt them for, for war machinery or whatever. But it just doesn't really make sense when, if you look at, like, this, all of the elements that are involved to, like, make these church bells, there's like a ton of, like, other, like, metal, steel, other apparatuses, like, around this, but they didn't want any of that. They only came, like, for these bells or prayer wheels or whatever these things were in the temple to to put out these, like, sound. And I looked a little deeper into some of these, like, papers written, like some of the abstracts and stuff, and it says historic examples show that authority figures would remove these bells for weaponry resources and as a political tool through enforced silence. And so it was this idea that, like, they, I guess, like, the powers that be, the leaders, they were getting rid of these bells because it would sort of, like, take away, like, hope, and there was, like, something in the power of these bells that they were taking away. So I guess the populations were, like, easier to control, similar to how, like, in Nazi Germany, fluoride was introduced. And I know that this is Tyler's conspiracy corner, but, we've known since literally Hitler introduced fluoride into the camps that it was put into the water it wasn't put in there to make their teeth better. It was put in there to, calcify your pineal gland. It was put in there to, sort of make the people there more docile, maybe a little dumber. And I think that it's kind of a similar thing with these bells.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, a lot of these bells, I think, what's interesting is seeing the ones that are, like, sort of stockpiled and then just sort of, like, whole chunks are taken out of it. Mm-hmm. And, these are, I mean, the difficulty is so many of them, especially, like, in that European area, are, like, made of, copper or...
Yeah, right. Or, like, bronze.
Bronze is what I should have said. And, that stuff would have been utilized. But what fascinates me most about this kind of stuff is a couple of things you said. I want to kind of go back to when you were talking about the thing that sort of well, I don't know. The first piece of interest I have is this thought about bells warding off evil, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about, when I think about just specifically, like, Christian-wise, when are bells rung? Well, sometimes in the center of town, like there's an Episcopal church in Gainesville. Excuse me, an Episcopal church in Gainesville. I want to say that it rings every hour, but then also, before church. So if you look at it that way, it's like they're warding off the evil spirits as people are kind of coming into the facility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then, dude, when somebody gets married,
Yeah.
If you ever go to Venice, man, the second there's weddings, like every day that we were there was somebody getting married in this little bitty chapel. It's really amazing, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, the church bells ring when somebody gets married. Is that to sort of, in a way, ward off any kind of evil spirits from this new union? You know what I mean? So I thought that was kind of interesting as you were saying that. And then the idea that to me, when you look at things like everything that the Nazis were doing, I kind of feel like they were just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck, And
Sort of.
in terms of these sort of bell graveyards, it's like maybe they were like, well, that doesn't. Maybe that works, maybe that doesn't. We just got all of them. You know what I mean? We're destroying them just in case.
Well, but the thing is, the bell graveyards go. We have them here in America. We have them in the East. Like that's the thing. It was like, as long as we like take all these bells and get rid of them, then we're good.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
With Amex Platinum, you can really be in the now. Access to Resi Priority Notify. Yes. 4 p.m. checkout with fine hotels and resorts booked through Amex Travel.
We needed this.
And dedicated card member entrances at select events.
Let's go!
Means you can focus on the present moment. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/withAmex. Card member entrance access not limited to Amex Platinum Card.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
Designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your...
Windshield wipers. eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Whatever you love, find it on eBay. eBay. Things people love.
We have one more act for you this evening. I don't even need to say his name. Mr. Bob Dylan.
From the director of Walk the Line and Ford vs. Ferrari.
If anyone is going to hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
Inspired by the true story.
I want to know which side he's on.
This Christmas.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my life.
Bobby, what do you want to be?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play it loud!
To change everything.
He's our Elvis.
With no direction.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro.
Make some noise, BD. Track some mud on the carpet.
A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
Rated E to T. You're listening to an ad for PC Game Pass. Want new games on day one like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle? How about living out your Sims life with EA Play? We're talking high-quality PC games all for one low monthly price. We got you. Learn more at xbox.com/PC Game Pass or click the banner. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle available December 9th, 2024. Game catalog varies by region and over time. Okay, that's the ad. You can go back to doing whatever you were doing now.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
This year, Santa's bringing the power of Energizer into his workshop.
Whoa, the Energizer Bunny's got so much power.
Wait, he's powered up all the toys. I think that means we're done for the year.
I love this bunny.
He's the hardest working helper the North Pole has ever seen. And he wants all your gifts to have the power of the #1 longest lasting AA battery. So this holiday season, stock up on Santa's and the elves' favorite battery, Energizer Ultimate Lithium.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Stop. 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 Had enough? Kick out mucus and quiet the cough with Mucinex 12-Hour DM for long-lasting cough and chest congestion relief. Buy Mucinex 12-Hour DM at your local retailer. Use as directed.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire. You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you? We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. I think people are probably wondering, like, to what purpose, though, right?
Yeah. Well, my sort of theory is that I think that not necessarily that these bells had to date back to this earlier sort of civilization or society or empire, if you will, but like for example, in 1484, so like the biggest bell ever created was in 1484, and it's called the Great Bell of Damazetti, and this is in Burma, so I guess it's like it would be kind of like around India. This was cast in 1484, and it's 300 tons. Mm-hmm. That's massive. Is the heaviest functioning bell in the world until 1608. That year, a Portuguese warlord, mercenary Philip de Brito, removed it and attempted to carry it by a specifically constructed craft down the Yangon River to his stronghold of Thanlin, later known as Syrium. However, the ship carrying the bell sank at the confluence of the Yangon and Bago rivers. The bell remains buried to this day at that location, possibly well preserved. But I mean, imagine, it's so massive and so heavy that it just is still continuing to sink. Like to this, I mean, honestly, like 300 tons.
Yeah.
And it was made in 1400s.
Is it in the river or the ocean? I didn't hear that part.
A river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that's wild. I'm sure like it's kind of, hit the ground or whatever and just eventually won't, get past a certain layer of the riverbed. But yeah, man. I mean, but like, so the thing about all of these things, like, wow, that sounds wild. Now I'll have to look up. I'm not sure of any, you'll have to show them to me, like the U.S. bell graveyards or whatever, these fields of bells. Immediately, all I can think of is Metallica. I could just hear in the background. Dong.
Dude, I literally have like right here, working title, For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Yes, dude, I love it.
Yeah.
Clay's going to be happy.
Yeah.
But like immediately I'm like, that's strange. It's weird. Yeah. I don't know why they would do that. It is easily explained for like, we got to melt down everything. I mean, because, just that one bell you're talking about, just one of them is how many tons?
300 tons.
300 tons. Heard it wrong. Even bigger. Man.
Yeah, dude.
That's a lot of bronze.
So big.
Yeah. And thinking about it in terms of like, maybe they just wanted to, there's all kinds of different reasonings that I could buy into, keep cities from being able to alert one another that the Germans were invading, all that kind of stuff. Push all that aside. What really hooked me in here was whenever I was like, well, why would they do that? And then you said this next part, which is really, to me, the absolute most interesting thing about it.
Yes. And again, this is what I was thinking of earlier that I totally blanked on. But to me, this is part of the thing that links it back to sort of the old world and some of the old world technology. A lot of people call it like antiquitech now as like sort of a buzzword, which is kind of bad. It's kind of like sort of steampunk kind of. And there's a lot of these. There's this idea that like from these old world, you see like all the old world architecture. I mean, almost every single one. We see them and we immediately think, oh, they're just like weather vanes or they're like lightning rods. But they all have like these spires, and the belief was like that they were able to kind of like harvest energy from the ether, and it's just this technology, especially since the birth of like fossil fuels, that is kind of been lost to history. And I brought up Nikola Tesla earlier because he has said. His like famous saying is like, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And, for me and like us, Woody and I both, like when I first read that, like it immediately made me think of like Edward Leeds Scownon, the Coral Castle mystery. You think of the pyramids. I think there's some like real power behind sound and vibration and resonance and that whole kind of thing. And
there's also a lot of weird, cool physical properties of sound too. Like Tyler and I will share back and forth videos of where they, film certain sound waves and frequencies with just like, sand or water and the shapes that it creates.
Oh yeah.
And the idea that someone like Tesla and or that time period, people could sort of harness that or build machines or instruments that could harness that is just so freaking cool to me, dude.
Oh yeah, it is like absolutely fascinating. I mean, even which, I'm not totally sold on Einstein because if you look into his history, there's a lot that's a little sketchy. Like maybe it was actually his wife, which is an interesting thing. But Einstein says everything in life has vibration and everything in the universe vibrates at a different frequency. So we are vibrating, atoms and like molecules and like we're all sort of like energy. So while I kind of like look down a little bit once it gets into like the more new age stuff and it's like, oh, you got to raise your vibrations. Like I think there actually is probably some like truth to it, Oh
yeah.
And with that, and what he's talking about is a thing called like cymatics. And so to me, when people, they just kind of like, they're like, oh, all this stuff is like debunked. There's nothing that's like, any sort of sound technology or like sound energy or, like frequency generators and stuff. Like, of course that wouldn't have anything to, it wouldn't have any effect on us. And it's like, wait a minute, why wouldn't it? Like,
right.
If I can have sand in a bowl and I can have a frequency generator and every like little click that I raise or lower that frequency, and again, it's called cymatics. You guys really should look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about because it is fascinating. And
yeah, dude.
Also the idea that like, okay, well, if this can do this to sand and our bodies are 60% water, and so with different frequencies sort of bombarding us, from external sources, like of course there's going to be, things are going to happen regarding that stuff. And so like maybe these bells are like tied into that. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe it is based on like a frequency thing. So we didn't have like tuning forks until 1711, right? And so every single musician before 1711 officially, they were tuning their instruments. They just sort of innately already knew how to tune the instruments. I mean, it's kind of like if you and I are hanging out and like one of us is playing guitar and it's like, oh, it's out of tune. You just kind of tune it with itself. But the interesting thing is that it always all these old, songs and even instruments. I mean, you look from the instruments found, that are dug up from like ancient Greek, God, I've done that twice today. From ancient Greece, they were tuned to 432 hertz. And it's just this natural sort of frequency that, a lot of people say that that's like the natural sort of heartbeat of the universe. It, will resolve at 432 hertz. They ended up finding that ancient instruments from ancient Egypt were also tuned to 432 hertz. And so that kind of goes back to that idea of like, and you and I have talked about it before, of like, well, the people of the old world, like they did have this kind of like innate connection to like the spiritual realm, or like, we talk about how like, nowadays, somebody that's like schizophrenic, maybe back in the old days would have been like a shaman, because they were able, or shaman. God, I do that every time too. They were able to like,
or shaman,
or shaman, yeah.
Shaman.
I literally say all three pronunciations every time I say that word.
Because it used to be one.
Yeah, it used to be one. They, back then, they probably would have had a connection to like the other sort of more metaphysical world. And so, I don't know, I think that's really interesting that like all of these ancient traditions and ancient instruments that have been found were naturally tuned. Before a tuning fork, they were naturally tuned to this 432. Well, what's interesting is, we're talking about how there's a possibility. And again, like, I haven't wanted to go into the Tartaria or old world stuff because I kind of want to have a guest on that's like a legit professional.
They're from there, a time traveler from there.
Yeah, we definitely want a time traveler. No, there's like so many people. We've spoken to a guy named Howdy McCoskey, he was one of the guys who kind of broke this thing, I mean, probably like 10 years ago. And then I was kind of late into it. And so he's kind of past it. He sort of he's focusing, he has like a new book that's on like, Plato's cave, that whole sort of theory. And he's kind of beyond like the World's Fair, Tartaria stuff. But we will have an expert that can kind of break it down much better than I can. But anyway, it's interesting because let's just hypothetically say, okay, there's this older civilization. Things are all being removed, destroyed, whatever. There's a great fire in every major city. All these old world architecture, are either, they're quote unquote like rebuilt, or that they were built in less than a year, and it's stuff that we couldn't build nowadays. I mean, that's the crazy thing, is all these structures they predate power. Like the power tool wasn't even around until like, I think 1908. And this is the most elaborate, incredible architecture you've ever seen. And so some of the people in this sort of community think that like, well, they weren't using, copper chisels like we're told, that the Egyptians were using. They were using some sort of like old world technology that was probably tied into like sound and resonance and vibration, much like the Coral Castle.
This is where it kind of gets confusing for me, because it seems like, and this is part of the reason why I'm looking forward to speaking to an expert about it. And I'm not saying that you're not an expert, but at the same time, I'm just saying like the people that are very well versed in this Tartaria stuff might be able to help me out with this. This is where it gets confusing for me. So what are we saying here? Are we saying that is it that there was an ancient civilization that had technology that is just really awesome? Like, so they built a building in a year, and then what does that mean?
No.
You know what I'm saying?
We're given the history, the quote unquote like official history on these like buildings and architecture all around the world. We're given the history that like, so here's the thing. I don't think, like I said, they never counted on people actually like really looking into this stuff. And so I think they just thought, yeah, just write down that we like, this guy and this guy and this guy built this place in a year. Well, the interesting thing is like, once you really start looking, you're going to find, and again, like because of the internet, because we have like, like search words and stuff will like pop up, and like even AI, we're able to see that like, oh, that's really bizarre because like this builder was also building all of these, the most elaborate structures you've ever seen that rival anything in Italy, anything in France, anything across Europe, right here in the US. And you see that like, oh, well, this same builder was building 100 of these structures in the same year. And this structure was said to be built in less than a year or in 2 years' time. Well, the thing that's great about the My Lunch Break guy is he breaks it down, and he even inputs stuff into AI like, okay, and it's stuff that we would never really think of. Like, okay, well, what resources would be needed to build a structure like this? And it's like, well, of course, this predates power tools, so you would need to build this in 2 years' time, you would need 100,000 men. Because again, this is horse and buggy. This is basically cowboy days. And it's weird because it's like, okay, well, during the cowboy days, you look at like the most primitive structures in a like a cowboy town, like Tombstone or something. You have like a storefront, and then like that's it. It's just whatever. We're told that at the same time that stuff was happening, that these cathedrals were built, 100, 200, 300, 400 years prior to that. And it's just the idea that these things were like around before. And so either we burned down to get rid of the evidence, or we just sort of co-opted, we moved in, we had a great fire, and then we renovated a few certain like parts of the building so that it appeared like, oh yeah, we built this building.
I see what you're saying. Okay, that makes more sense to me because it's just like, hey man, there's this old ancient civilization. We're going to burn it down. Then we're going to magically build it in a year just because what? Well, you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, so that you have a history that it's being built, just like the World's Fairs, which...
Right. That makes more sense now. Yeah.
Yeah, like the World's Fair stuff is, and I don't want to get too far because it is so fascinating, but that's the thing that really hooked me. Because for me at first, the Tartaria stuff, I kept hearing like, oh, Tartaria, and I'm like, what is that? Like, is it related to the Tartars, which were a civilization that we knew about? But it's like, no, this is a different thing. This is Tartaria, a place that is on all of these ancient maps, but for some reason, they're not on any modern map whatsoever. And it's weird because if like I said, it's in CIA documents that have been sort of uncovered. But so the thing with all this is like, okay, something about our ancient history was being hidden, destroyed. Around the same time, you also have this rise of insane asylums, which were everywhere around like the turn of the century. Around that same time, you also have these things called orphan trains, which I think the number is like 450,000 orphans were brought from Europe, from Asia, and there's not really much that's said about them. Like we don't know much about like where were these kids coming
There's
from?
your workforce.
Well, yeah, that was your workforce.
There's your workforce.
Yeah,
I mean,
the parents who pushed back against all this, they were thrown into an asylum because they were dissidents or they were,
Now, real quick, because I want to make sure that we stay on task because we're starting to lean pretty heavily into this Tartaria stuff, and I like it. But the thing that really kind of fascinated me was this frequency stuff. So
So the interesting thing is around this time, and again, I'm not going to get super into it. You kind of have the rewriting completely of our history. You have this thing which was by the Rockefellers, which are kind of known as one of the few families who kind of run the world. And you had this thing called the Rockefeller Education Initiative. That was like what was in every single school. It was in other countries as well, but especially in America. Every single school, and that's still the education curriculum, all that stuff that we are being taught today, which is interesting because we're not taught about any of the stuff that I'm talking about. We're not taught about the bells. We're not taught about the orphan trains. We're not taught about any of that. So it was kind of a way to reset history as they wanted it to be taught. And I know this sounds crazy, but anyway, right around the same time, in 1917, it was mandated And it's funny because once you look into why or who, it was pushed by the Rockefeller family. All instruments were to be manufactured in the tuning of 440 frequency, which, like I brought up before, if you're looking at cymatics and if you put sand in a plate and you have a frequency generator at 432, it creates this beautiful, like these like structures, almost like hexagonal star shapes.
We'll return after these messages.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Looking for a pickup truck to get just about anything done? Look no further. The Chevy Silverado EV isn't just the most powerful Silverado ever, with next-level towing capability and technology. It also offers game-changing versatility with the available multi-flex midgate and tailgate, which means Silverado EV helps you carry large, bulky, and oddly shaped items up to nearly 11 feet in length. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive. Visit Chevrolet.com to learn more.
Streaming December 12th on Peacock. Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie are back.
That's hot. Loves it.
For a show-stopping reunion that will prove putting on an opera is anything but simple.
We're really good at this.
One thing's for sure, they won't be upstaged.
Good to have you back. Come on, we've got a show to do.
Paris and Nicole, The Encore, a 3-part reunion special, streaming December 12th, only on Peacock.
I'm James McComb, reporting live from home in my bathrobe and slippers. Tonight, we're talking Dunkin' Polar Peppermint Coffee. Gene's here with the latest. Gene, do you copy?
The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be.
Behind the delivery trucks that keep your life stocked, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People bringing a new offshore production platform online. People making our refineries capable of more, like making renewable diesel from agricultural waste. People trading and shipping fuels to our customers. And people helping truckers fill up and get maintenance at our convenient locations. They're part of the more than 300,000 jobs BP supports across the country. Learn more at bp.com/investing in America.
Screwball peanut butter whiskey? Why the hell not? A little salty, a little sweet, a little savory, and always smooth. Screwball, the original peanut butter whiskey that's unexpectedly delicious. Visit screwballwhiskey.com to learn more. That's Screwball with a K. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2023 Screwball Spirits, LLC, New York, New York.
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write 1 million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at Opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show.
So the frequency would change from 432 to 440 in 1917. All instrument production and manufacturing changed to that tuning in 1926. And then the Rockefellers enforced the change on all of radio in 1935 to 440 hertz, which, I mean, it's...
Now, just them, or is this a global change?
Global change. Yeah. I think so this was 1935. I think globally it changed in like 1940, but it was right around that same time. And that's the other thing that I find interesting, because there's very few things like internationally that we're sort of taught, like, oh, well, this country hates this country. Like, from the Cold War, it's like, oh, for us, like, the Russians are bad, right? Even though I have changed my tune a little bit on that, but
about if Russians are bad?
Yeah, a little bit. I think there's a little more to it than what we're being told. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But for people that are like, oh, so what I was saying is like wait, hold on, I just asked, do you know anybody from Russia? Not personally.
Yeah, you got to talk to them, and I think you'll change your mind pretty quick about whether or not there's a fair amount of evil.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, if we've learned anything in the last 5 years, is that there is like a sort of narrative being pushed, and I've just come to a place where I don't just question it in the last 5 years. It's made me start questioning things, like going back further, basically.
Yeah.
But, it's similar to the Antarctic Treaty, which was passed in 1959, where all the countries agree that, and even countries that we're supposedly at war with, like, oh, well, we all agree on this. No one's allowed in Antarctica. And I just find that really interesting. But anyway, it's that idea that, I guess for me, it's sort of like, well, why? Like, what was, if all of human history up until now, why are we changing this tuning when, like I said, dating back to ancient Egyptian instruments, ancient Greece, instruments were dug up that all are on that 432 frequency. Even in 1953, there was Professor Dassault of the Paris Conservatoire and 23,000 other musicians that they signed a referendum to preserve the natural harmony, and it was rejected. And it's really interesting too, because like once you really start getting into it, you see that it's like, the effects of like frequency and resonance can be tied into like your DNA code, the resonance of like cell structure in our bodies. And so, I don't know. I think it's really interesting, and I think that there's there's no way that there's not a tie to, these bells being removed all across the globe, and then suddenly the frequency that we've been doing in all music, up until the 30s, suddenly like that's changed. And that was the thing too, that I don't know if I had a chance to get into this, but we were talking about cymatics before and doing the sand on the plate with like a frequency generator, and you look at 432 and it's gorgeous. It looks like it's really interesting because in cymatics, like you have certain frequencies that are very, there's an order to them, and they're this like sort of everything's very symmetrical. And so 432 is like this perfect kind of thing, and then you bump it to 440 and it sort of like falls into chaos. And I just find it really interesting that suddenly like that's the one we settled on, And they say if you try to like look into like, well, why did they do that? I mean, there's no real response. It's just like, oh, well, they bumped it up a few because a higher frequency made things sound like richer. And it just, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But I sent you a bunch of texts, and like the interesting thing is there are a ton of like frequencies that are very, I don't know, they're very similar to like your stained glass windows in all those old world cathedrals. Do you see that one? Yeah. Where it breaks down like certain keys, and it's kind of crazy because they're like almost exactly the same.
What's also interesting, too, when you look at these things is it sort of, adjacently kind of reminds me of when you look at, microscopic images of like diatoms and stuff like that occur, things and patterns that occur in nature.
Yeah. Snowflakes.
And then now we're looking at snowflakes and how crystals form in a certain way, and crystallization, I should say. It's interesting because you look at these sound waves, and again, the thing that fascinates me most about it is, well, you said something earlier, and I was going to interject then, but people who would be skeptical to the fact that sound could affect your body, you say that, and I feel like that would be that kind of person that would be absolutely skeptical to that. I think is pretty small percentage now because, gosh, you can get on Spotify and look up. They have different frequencies for focus and relaxation.
Like binaural beats and stuff.
All that kind of stuff. But then also we know that, even powerful magnets can affect your brain and stuff. And so you're not supposed to get those near your head. And, all of these different waves. Thing that makes me scared nowadays really is things like Bluetooth and stuff. What are we going to find out about that in about 20 or 30 years? And so I think it's easier for us to accept the fact that there can be these different frequencies if you're a fan of Bigfoot and that kind of stuff and that lore. We've talked before on the show, but I'm sure other podcasts have as well about these really low frequencies that can make you feel that you can't even audibly hear necessarily, that can make you feel sick and that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Oh, dude. I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't even think about that. But that's so there's technology that goes back to, I think it was originally a Nazi thing, and then oddly enough, a Russian kind of thing, to where they were creating sound technology, and there's a thing called the Brown sound. Have you ever heard of this?
Well, I don't know if I should say this on the podcast because I don't know how. Let's just say that Russia certainly isn't the only country currently that has technology and weaponry based around sound.
Oh no! Everyone now,
right?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going back to the 70s.
Okay, cool.
And there was a thing called the Brown sound, which funnily enough, back then it was that's just urban legend. But they would test these things at concerts and stuff, and it would immediately make people nauseated, throw up, empty their bowels.
Yeah, man.
And so there's a whole thing. But on the flip side of that, this is something that I found really interesting. So when I started looking into the effects of music in 432 hertz, which is the natural one, you see the song In the Air Tonight, Jeff Buckley's Hallelujah, Metallica's Nothing Else Matters, Prince's Purple Rain. These are all songs that were recorded in 432 hertz.
And 432 is the good one or the bad one?
The good one. That's the good one.
Okay.
And bands like Pink Floyd, Tool, John Lennon, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, Prince. That's just to name a few. But a few of these bands were really interested in kind of keeping that 432 hertz. And specifically with Tool, I find it interesting because Danny Carey, they're all kind of very interesting guys to say the least. But Danny Carey, the drummer, if you ever go see Tool, he has this huge gong behind him, and he's really big on sacred geometry, and it has all these crazy symbols and stuff on it. He was a huge, he's obsessed with Aleister Crowley, and so he owns several manuscripts, and kind of like Jimmy Page. And it's interesting because that they would choose to do that because sacred geometry, it kind of falls right in line with that, very symmetric, frequency, when you do the cymatics, it creates those symbols, which is kind of fascinating.
Now, we talked about pet peeves in the Patreon not too long ago. And I got to say, one of them is whenever I discover something that dang it, they were right all along. And you said something earlier too, we were talking about both of us will typically kind of shy away, or at least kind of in our past, me specifically, I'll speak for myself here, kind of scoffed at certain ideas well, if you rub this crystal on your forehead, you're hey man, can I just get a Tylenol? You know, like you get that kind of stuff. And admittedly, I've kind of scoffed at the idea. But here we are now. We're in our 40s. We're wiser. We're more attuned to things, open-minded. And it is hard to just easily brush away the power of sound. And when you kind of, now, again, even this episode, I think, is really surface level, because I would love to dive, me personally, more into researching the different frequencies and the studies behind their effect on you and stuff. Because, you listen to some of these things, and maybe some of it is sort of, what is that, psychosomatic, where I listen to like one of these focus frequency things, and I feel like dialed in, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah, that's what it's for, yeah.
And and this idea that this kind of comes back around to what with the Nazis and stuff. You've got folks destroying bells that were, I guess, a certain frequency. You're saying the 432, right?
Yeah. Natural, like, sort of frequency always tends to sort of rest or like resolve in like 432 in nature, which is, it's pretty interesting that, everything that we've sort of proposed on this episode, Nazis, even Americans, whatever, getting rid of the bell, the powers that be changing it to 440 hertz, which is a clearly chaotic sort of frequency, that suddenly, now all music is going to be sort of chaotic, and it's not going to be like a healing kind of thing. Then you involve the Rockefellers doing the same thing, and then that same family, the Rockefellers, come out with the education initiative, which is in all the schools. That's what we're taught. We're taught like, this is history. This is what we're taught, and this is the way things are. And I mean, it's got to, if nothing else, even if you don't believe in any of this, hopefully it will help you question that maybe we haven't been fully taught, like, maybe it isn't like the end all be all of like what we've been taught in schools. Like, maybe there is more to it, I mean, like, and this again goes back to like the Tesla, the Nikola Tesla thing with some people believe that when he was in Budapest, like, that he was possibly like studying or like learning some of this like old world thing, because it's interesting, because after he left Budapest and would come back to the US, like I think in like New York, Brooklyn or whatever, his big push at that point was, we got to do like I got to figure out this free energy thing. And he was really big into like ether. He's really big into like finding out a way to like transmit energy through the air. And again, like, this is a thing that is kind of like presumed within like this old world, if you want to call it Tartarian architecture, these like spires that are there to harvest energy.
Man.
And so, I don't know, man. I think there's so much to like sound and resonance and frequency in like the building of these structures, the building of like the pyramids, continuing on to the building of like the coral castle, that's able to have this like crazy precise, because I don't know if we had mentioned this on that episode, but I was looking into Edward Leeds Scownon, the guy who did the coral castle stuff, and one of the books that he puts out, or his like little sort of a pamphlet really that they found after he had died, was like the secrets of Egypt. And so that would have been like this old world kind of thing. And so was he privy to that knowledge, and is that how he was able to build these structures where it said that like they were so precise that like, light couldn't even pass through the cracks?
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 23, The Coral Castle.
Yeah. And do you think, I'll ask you now, do you think that this technology existing and stuff, and the fact, and then it like being hidden or something, do you think that is sort of just like what I think every society essentially is always trying to do, which is have that sort of leg up,
like gatekeep?
Yeah, and like have that additional knowledge and keep it and use it as an advantage, in other words.
Yeah, I think so. I think like if you want to get into like the elites or whatever, like the Rockefellers, like the robber barons of the 18 and 1900s, I do think that, because that's another thing that's really interesting is like, the Rockefellers are behind, you kind of look into, and if any of our listeners are Rockefellers, I apologize, but if you look into their history, you start looking into, everything's fossil fuels. Everything is, you got to push this like petroleum oil-based, combustion engine type energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some of it was just naturally lost to history. I think a lot of it was intentionally destroyed or co-opted
for like profitability.
For these robber barons. I mean, that's how they became. And that's the other thing with the Rockefellers is not only was it, means for like, cars and all that, but then it also carried over to Big Pharma is also associated with like petroleum oil-based, remedies and medicine and all that. So like, I think it's tied into a lot of stuff. I think there is like a, and this is just me personally, I do believe that there is a class or like a handful of like families that, they're the same families that run all of media today. There's literally a family called like the Estes family who owns all local news, like literally like 97% of all local news. And, you see those clips, like if you're into any of this on your social media, you see those clips where all these like local news networks are reading off the same script. And it's like, well, there's a reason for that because they own all those networks. And then there's, all the media, all of Hollywood, all of like, it seems so conspiratorial and just like crazy, but if you really look into like the beginnings of all of that and like the 1800s, as we look as like, for America specifically, is like, that was like the beginning of like the modern age. And like I said, then power tools come along in like 1908 or 5. It's like these same families that are still in power. So it does kind of lead you to believe that there's more than what we've been taught, to say the least.
Yeah. Whew. And then, I really do kind of coming back all the way around. It now makes a little bit more sense to me why the Nazis would collect the bells. If they're known to dispel, because then you got to bring in like other. That's what I meant earlier when I said like I feel like they just threw a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what stuck. They were doing everything in their exploration of like getting extra power from somewhere. So if there are these bells that exist that can like ward off demons, and the Nazis are over there trying to summon them, that's one reason. If these bells are known to be ringing in the 432 frequency and they want to spread 440 chaos into the world, well, then that's another reason.
Oh, nice.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, like, I don't know, man. It's wild. And then it starts making, when you start talking about, like, these barons and, like, these elite organizations that sort of supersede even different global governments. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, in other words, they're even more powerful than that. They're the ones that can potentially be making these decisions. Look at me now, man. Now I might as well be wearing a tinfoil hat. But
you should,
they're making this determination. It's easy to go down that road and sort of connect the dots a little bit, So it's wild.
Well, yeah, and also even if you're just looking at it as like and I used to fall into this of like we'll just follow the money and that'll figure it out. I don't necessarily believe that at this point in my life. Like I used to think like, everything's based around like money. And I think a lot of it was back then, which, would lead someone who is like, everything was just to gain power and to gain money and all that stuff. Even if you're just looking at it like that, why is it that the beginnings of big pharma and, fossil fuel related medicine is the same family who put out a national mandate that every radio station had to be tuned at 440. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like everything before that, if music and that frequency is a healing thing, it would make sense that you would get rid of that so that, now this person needs to rely on me because I can make medicine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which also ties into the bells and, getting rid of all that stuff. So it's really fascinating. And I hope that my hope for this is that it's at least piqued some of your interest into some of the old world stuff and this idea that like certain things have been hidden from us in our history books and our sort of agreed upon history. I think there's a lot more to it. And I think throughout the years, like these anomalies like Nikola Tesla, I kind of think that, and I may be totally off, maybe he was just I think he was probably a genius anyway, but I do think that some of these people were the guys that maybe kind of slipped through the cracks, who maybe knew certain people that were from that old world, that were able to kind of pass on that information. So for us, we look back as like, man, he was just a genius, and he was just like coming up with ideas for cold fusion and free energy and that kind of thing. And again, I do think he's a genius, but maybe there was more to it, and maybe he was just kind of continuing on that legacy of like what the people from like that sort of old world were already doing all along, And there's like a lot more to it that kind of gets into, it's like a deep, deep rabbit trail. And actually, we may do a Patreon here soon, because it kind of could tie into some sort of like Christian stuff on the timeline, which for me kind of answers some of like the whys, Yeah, so we'll think about it. But I definitely do want someone that's just widely versed on the Tartaria old world stuff.
Yeah, and by the way, listeners, like especially if you're like super into this stuff, like whenever you were a kid, you could have like your parent tell you something, and then you're like, ugh, whatever. And then your cool uncle is like, hey man, no, or like somebody else comes in, you're like, oh yeah. And you like the idea. That's kind of what's happening now between Tyler and I. Like, Tyler tells me this stuff all the time. I'm like, oh. So listeners, if you're super into the Tartaria stuff and know a ton about it, hit us up. Send me a message on Instagram in our That Would Be Rad account, because, and if you know of like a documentary, I need like a centralized telling of because I always come back to like, it still doesn't, like I've got to have somebody give me their theory on the why, like why, like to what end and what benefit.
Well, there's a guy that, no, I'm not. I'm just saying, like, if you are interested, there's a guy on YouTube called John Levi. He's done like a ton of videos. His voice is very calming to the point where it could kind of get a little like monotonous, I've heard. He does great work. Again, the My Lunch Break guy. There is a documentary called Old World Order that I think you can find on Rumble, which is pretty cool. It's kind of like a very, succinct way of looking at it. I think there's a lot that was sort of left out, but it is interesting because he gets into, there being like blimps everywhere. And it does show like a lot of photos where it's like you see these blimps sort of docked on these like spires or these towers. And it's like, what were they doing? Were they like filling up, were they like getting a fill up on like, electrostatic energy, and is that how they were able to like operate? And like, there's just so much to what we've been told. I mean, even all the photos, like it's things that you never really think of. It's like when you see like, oh, this is like an old, this massive cathedral in the middle of a city. And, 10 years ago, I would have looked at that and been like, oh, there's no problem. But then you start seeing a pattern, and there's even a thing called vanilla sky, where it's this, all the skies are whited out on all the photos. And it's like all these early construction photos, supposedly, there's like some scaffolding. You never see these things built from the ground up or any photos. You only see them whenever they're completely already built, and then there's like a single scaffold. And then you'll see
what year are we talking here?
This is like 1800s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and again, I know you're going to hit me with like, oh, well, it was exposure and cameras.
Well, that, blah, blah, blah. And just like, I mean, it was kind of an expensive ordeal to take a picture So, but I mean, I get
No. But I'm saying like you start seeing like a real pattern of like, well, that's weird. How is there an entire city and there's only like 2 people in the photo? And every single one of these photos, there's no sky, there's no clouds. It's completely whited out.
Yeah.
So were there, you know, and I've said this before, I don't believe that the Wright brothers, like that was the very beginning of like, you know, sort of mass-produced flight. I think that it did go back further. I think that blimps were a lot more prominent than what we were kind of taught, you know.
Yeah.
There's just so much to it that kind of starts ticking away at like what we were taught.
Yeah,
basically.
it's kind of in a lot of ways too. It's kind of like the we fondly remember like elementary school and the things that we learned because almost everything that they teach you is like a legendary. It's like like a
Paul Bunyan.
Yeah, man. It's like a story, and it's like, oh wow, did you know this? You know, I kind of in a way, I kind of feel like a lot of that stuff isn't really. I swear, my kids didn't learn any of that.
Yeah.
For real.
Yeah.
I don't even know that my kids know who Paul Bunyan is. Or Johnny Appleseed. Well, maybe Johnny Appleseed. Maybe not, though. Yeah, for real. Now,
like John Henry.
None of that stuff,
all that
dude.
Stuff.
But, you know, they're in the gifted program, so they're trying.
No, I just say Paul Bunyan bull because, like, that's the term that I use whenever, you know, you read stuff that is like sort of the public record, like, oh, well, this massive building was built in 1 year, and it was by a guy. This was his first building that he had ever, you know.
I just don't understand. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't understand what they're trying to hide. Now, all that stuff is strange, sure. I don't understand, like, other than just saying like this is weird, which it is. What are they hiding this guy for?
What are they hiding the sky
for?
For?
This guy or the sky or, you know, if they're building something.
I think so. It's a way to like literally recraft like your own narrative of like, oh, we did all this. We like, I think there's a lot of
what that's what I'm saying. Like recraft the narrative to say we did this to hide that there's an ancient civilization.
I mean, I think there's a lot more to it.
Okay.
I think it also gets into like the mud flood. It gets into there being like an event that
here's what I'm going to do, man. I'm going to say it because we're getting close to the end of the year.
Okay.
You know, we just came off this Thanksgiving holiday. I'm probably a good 5 to 10 pounds heavier.
Oh yeah.
I got a lot of goals for the new year. And as you folks know, we typically take a break around Christmas, coming up here pretty soon, actually. Take a few weeks off as we go into the new season. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to make it official.
Okay.
Beginning of season 5, going into the new year.
Yeah.
Okay? We're going to cover the mud flood. We're going to cover Tartaria, tartar sauce. We're going to cover all of that stuff, ancient civilizations, evidence that there were people that lived, you know, around the world with incredible technology and buildings potentially. We're doing it. First thing out of the year, coming in hot.
Okay.
Because like otherwise, you know, it's going to be another season. You know what I mean? Where we're just like, we're at the end going, well, we want to cover. No, we're doing those things coming in hot.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the thing is it's going to open a lot of, like, once you open that box, it's going to lead to.
I like it.
Episode after episode.
Yeah.
That's like linked to it. You know?
I love it.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, if you've enjoyed this podcast, we're happy about that. If you want to talk to us, if you want to send us your own story, maybe like what he said, maybe you're you're kind of the expert on Tartaria, the mud flood, old world technology. Feel free to hit us up or drop us a DM on our Instagram. If it's more of a long form kind of thing, shoot it over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Even better, and you want to tell it in your own words. And again, we're also accepting like cryptids or, you know, things that you thought were cool from the 80s that, you know, you want us to talk about anything and everything, and you want to leave it in your own voice, head on over to thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can leave a voice memo and it possibly can show up on a future episode. Also, another thing is I was listening to an old episode the other day, and for a while, a lot of our true blue old school listeners were leaving, the little bumpers that we have where it's like, I'm so-and-so, and when I'm not skateboarding with Tony Hawk, I'm listening to my favorite podcast. That would be rad.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had a lot of those, and I kind of want to get a little more of them. So if you want to do that and you want to be a part of our official That Would Be Rad history, drop us that memo over on the website. If you want to support the show, head to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail. It's a little looser. We record a little later at night, and it's the best way that you can support the show kind of in real time. Go tell a friend about the show. Leave a 5-star review.
Leave a 5-star review.
Leave a 5-star review. If you have the time, it really means a lot, and it really helps kind of pivot that algorithm in our favor. I guess that's it. We hope you've had a wonderful Thanksgiving for all of our U.S. listeners. And we'll see you next week. We love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future